Okay, this is Gareth from the iMoot team. It is my great pleasure to introduce Andy Chaplin, who's going to talk about Moodle for the Lone Ranger and everything that involves. Really looking forward to it. Thank you, Andy.
Hi, everyone, and good evening from Germany. The title of the presentation is brutally obvious that it's clickbait, but it's quite an important issue for me. I've been using Moodle now for 8 or 9 years, and in that time, I've pretty much run everything myself. I've been my own administrator, course creator, teacher. I've had a few other teachers now that come in and help me, but largely I produce everything myself. That's everything that I don't steal from other providers. The important thing, or the reason why I think that that's a subject worth talking about, is that I'm in the business of language teaching, and I work as a consultant in a secondary school here in Germany, where I've revamped their English teaching system somewhat. But my main focus is on teaching in industry. I'm not a qualified teacher. I studied engineering and industrial management, and came to, I would say, industrial training quite late. And then as a sort of a meeting in a bar led to me becoming an advisor at a school. So I'm not the classical teacher profile. And that means that I tend to look at things rather differently to a lot of my pure teacher colleagues. What I always like to do is to start off any presentation with what it's not about. And this applies really to, I think, to Moodle in general. If you're using Moodle, and from what I can see from the feedback that was already on the course side, most people have got a fair bit of experience in using Moodle. We all know it's not a quick fix. It's not a magic bullet that's going to solve a problem just by applying Moodle to the situation. One of the things that I'm quite averse to really is psychobabble, and by that I mean all the technical jargon that gets thrown into teaching. Is it pedagogy or pedagogy? I don't know, because everybody seems to say it differently at every presentation I go to. But all of these things I take for granted. I'm not here to talk about learning outcomes, and I'm not here to talk about learning styles and things like that. I assume that you people know what you want to do, and that you're really just looking for maybe a few ideas on moving things forward. I'm not a computer coder either. I know a very little bit about basic programming. I did some at the end of the 70s. As fun in the sixth form, I produced a small basic program that predicted the outcome of horse races in Britain. As you can see, it didn't work, but it was fun doing it nonetheless. And I've always liked to tinker a little bit with HTML and things like that. But the coding that's involved with Moodle is way above my head. And secondly, it's something that I always think is important when you're presenting, is to say that it's not something, I'm not here to tell you what to do. You're all clever people. You're all experienced people, or you wouldn't be here. That's quite clear to me. But sometimes when you're presenting, the tone comes through that this is how it's to be done. And this is really, I'm going to talk about my experiences and hope that some of the things that have happened to me and some of the things that I've introduced will be useful and maybe provide a springboard for you. I intend to talk for about half an hour to 35 minutes. It slightly depends how much the adrenaline kicks in and whether that means I talk faster or I talk more. We'll have to wait and see on that. But please, any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to talk about that for as long as people want. So it's 2006, and I working with a couple of big companies in North Germany, teaching business English and technical English. And then I got involved with a school that had some drastic problems in their English teaching, which was kind of strange because they actually had 2 native speakers as teachers, and the non-native speakers were really pretty good teachers. But it didn't seem to be working. And I was asked by the headmaster to come in and have a look. And as a result, I revamped the system there, turned it into a system that's more based on a language school. The kids there are taught in levels as opposed to being taught in years or in classes. So we have a sort of level system from 1 to 8. Sooner or later, the industrialist in me wanted to collect some statistics about this and start to produce standardized results, standardized testing. And to be honest, I don't remember where I first heard about Moodle. I can't remember. It must have been in a blog or in some website. And the one thing that struck my mind mostly was that it was free. And it seemed to be an idea for using some kind of online teaching system. So we had a lot of computers at the school, and I thought maybe this was something that we could look at. The one thing is there's no money coming from the school. Schools don't invest in things that they've never heard of. And I wasn't being paid the world, so money was going to be an issue there. I didn't have a domain. This was going to have to be run on some kind of server. And the school was not going to provide it because the IT manager at the school was the classical paranoid, lock everything out type of IT manager. So that wasn't going to happen. So I was going to have to provide some kind of server myself. Apathy amongst the colleagues was also a problem. And nobody really saw the need to introduce such a system. And then came the issue of not having any time. I had a busy life. I still do have a busy life. I have to produce a lot of work, a lot of materials for my customers, and the extra time involved was a little bit daunting. And the only real thing was that I had no great fear of computers. So the idea of doing something on a computer, I've always known that pretty much that pushing a button doesn't break anything. And I think that's certainly very important for people who are non-experts to be aware of this, that it's pretty difficult to actually cause serious damage just with one false mouse click. So I thought about my friend Corporal Jones from Dad's Army. For any of you that don't come from the UK, this might be a rather strange allusion, but Corporal Jones is screaming and running around screaming, don't panic, was something that was a big memory from my childhood, and something which I've always adopted as a sort of slogan when being confronted with something new that could be quite serious. A lot of the sort of, I would say, corporate inertia that I dealt with, of people not wanting to change anything, not wanting to introduce it. Why do we need to do this? And it basically meant that at the end, I had to decide to do it for myself. I realized that nothing was going to happen in the direction of producing online materials, what I didn't know then as a phrase, but we now call blended learning. So I decided I was going to do it myself. And I checked out the requirements, and it really wasn't too bad. I found, firstly, the great thing, the basic cost of the software is $0. I needed a hosting service and found one, not in Germany. They were all too expensive. I found one in America. The picture there, which you saw as the background of the previous slide, was actually quite appropriate, because that's more or less how much I paid to start up. The first 3 months was $9.95 US dollars. Not an awful lot more than the small change in the hand there. Didn't seem like a very great risk to me. And all in all, the outlay that I put down for the first year was under $50, which was something which I felt was more than acceptable risk. What else do I need to get started? Yeah, an email address. Didn't need anything else. I just needed that to register with the hosting provider. And then came the other two things on the right-hand side there. One of the most important team members in my then team of one with a couple of virtual helpers was the crash test dummy. The crash test dummy has become a very important team member in my company. He has his own role within Moodle. I have actually an account called Johnny Tester, and he is the student that checks that everything runs the way that I want it to run. It requires a sort of slightly schizophrenic personality to be the teacher and to be the admin and to be the student. And I have in effect created 3 personas for that, which allows me to test certain things on the system quite thoroughly without having to guess what's going to happen when a student looks at this. The stopwatch was quite interesting because this whole process from Googling a cheap Moodle web host to creating the first quiz, a monstrous affair of one quiz with one multiple choice question, took just over half an hour. It required a credit card payment, click for an automatic install of the Moodle server software, and then I started playing with it. And in 35 minutes, I had my first question, which I should have taken a screenshot for posterity, but I didn't realize that it was going to be carrying on for so long. Yes, there's a certain amount of foolhardiness in this type of approach. There wasn't any type of business plan. There wasn't any type of concept really of what I was going to do with it. It was a plaything at first, and I just wanted to see whether this was a good idea. And I felt that it was good value for money. Pretty quickly, I started taking on the big guys. Now, I at the time was a self-employed language teacher, and I work in a small town called Salzgitter in northern Germany, which is a great place to drive through quickly. Don't open the windows, just put your foot down. There's no speed limit on German autobahns. Get through and find a nicer place to go to. The one thing that Salzgitter's got is it's surrounded by really big industry, big, heavy players. Volkswagen, Bosch, MAN, Salzgitter AG, Steelworks, and a number of other seriously big industrial companies are in the local area. So it's a pretty good place for a specialist in technical English to work. And this was my ace in the hole, really. There's an awful lot of language training companies out there. There's a lot of very big names out there, and they have big budgets, and they have lots of teachers, and they can produce lots and lots of materials. And I was walking into these companies as a single player, and pitching to do courses with managers against international training organizations. I got lucky at one of the companies. I got a guy who wanted lessons, and he happened to be the factory manager, which meant that very soon I had half of the board of directors as personal customers. But it's not enough when you're on your own. There's still this feeling, yes, this guy, he's just one teacher. And I very much needed to be as professional as the big organizations. And quite early on, I saw that Moodle was a possibility to slightly level the playing field. It allows me to do things that I can't do as just a standalone teacher. And it allows me to a certain extent to take on the major players. Jumping ahead to today, I now have half a dozen teachers that work for me on part-time basis in various areas around Germany and in France. But at that point, I was on my own, and we're still a very, very tiny company. But we do regularly pitch against these type of companies because we can show a professional image. And I sincerely believe that the Moodle aspect of what we offer was an extremely important part of that success. At the start, I said I produced a quiz in half an hour with one question. And at the beginning, probably for the first couple of months or so, the only thing that I produced on that were very, very basic quizzes, extremely simple multiple choice quizzes, which I used very occasionally with certain customers. It wasn't something where I said, okay, I've got to do all this. I've now got to convert all my system into this. I took it very slowly, basically because I hadn't got the time to invest in any type of concerted effort to use Moodle. What was important for me was this KISS principle, keep it short and simple. And at the beginning in the school, I used it with a couple of classes, a couple of groups, just some basic multiple choice, then some single word gap sentences, past simple, irregular verbs, things like that, extremely basic stuff. But this allowed me to get a feel for where I could use things. At the time, there was no presentation material. There was just these tests. Everything else I did face-to-face. And then, yeah, the summer holidays arrived, and I was able to spend a bit of time working on that where I didn't have to be at school during the day or with other, not so many industrial clients in the summer. And I was able then to start looking at expanding the system. And this happened very, very slowly. I didn't think, to be honest, about anything to do with, courses that were in any way a complete entity. And this was really something that was just about providing certain aspects of my teaching. After that, it moved more into the area of homework. I realized that it could be used for bridging the gaps between lessons quite well. And I produced, some learning materials. I adapted what I'd got. I realized fairly quickly that what sits on a sheet of A4 paper does not necessarily look very good on a screen. And things like that were very slowly adapted because I was doing it on my own. And one of the things that I would say to people really that are starting off is, don't be imaginative. Keep it simple. Do the easy things and get a feel for that. Be aware that you have control over simple exercises, simple quizzes. I didn't even use assignments at the beginning because for me, that was far too complicated. And also at that time, the students themselves, the learners, weren't comfortable with things like uploading files. It wasn't something that was automatic. It wasn't something that mostly everybody did. But there's so many things, and when you come to something like iMoot, and certainly at Moodle.org, when I go there looking for help and trying to offer help to people, you see there's so many things that you can do, and it's very, very tempting, even at the beginning. Currently, there's someone on Moodle.org who's clearly quite new to the business, and I can see that this person's trying to do far too much right at the beginning. There's clearly a lack of knowledge about how Moodle really works and what you can do with it. And there's things about payment gateways and PHP problems and everything imaginable. And this is not really a very good way of moving it forward, particularly when you're not really an expert. As the Lone Ranger, your best friend is the forum. And the forum, particularly at Moodle.org, is the first call for problems. And I see that Mary is listening to this presentation and is certainly one of the stalwarts of this thing. And I'm certainly very, very grateful to her. As a small thank you, Mary, you were the very first person that I ever followed on Twitter. So thank you very much for being that person for me. The crash test dummy, Johnny Tester, he's still there. It's a really important role for people who are running their own site to have this other persona, this somebody that, this role that is really completely divorced from the teacher, that you log into the site as a different person and check these things. And to a certain extent, you have exchanges with this person. I exchange messages with Johnny Tester. I give him feedback on his efforts at voice submissions and things like that. This person is quite important. The other person that's very important is this little guy here, Olaf. Olaf is the administrator of the website, and I've used Olaf right from the start to create a third character. He is the administrator of the website. I'm a teacher or a course manager. I fulfill those roles within the site. If I want to do anything that's administrative, Olaf logs in and does the job. Complete with a profile photo, very similar to the one you can see there. And it does cause some amusement by managers who log in and find an elk attending to some details on the site. But again, keeping the roles separate is a very important thing. Certainly at the beginning, Googling lots of things was very important. I got much better at finding solutions to problems and learning how to really use Google, not just putting in one keyword and things like that. It was something that was part of my learning curve. So certainly something that's very important. It's also a tip that I would give. Frankly, I find sometimes on Moodle.org, when you have a problem in a forum or you're looking for something, is that the internal search function is not always as helpful as it might be. It returns an awful lot of results. And sometimes putting the same search term into Google actually produces a much finer result than it seems to in Moodle.org. I don't know why, because I understand they also use Google as their search engine, but for some reason the external one seems to produce more accurate results. And then my friend Coffee, because at the beginning, and certainly for the first few years, the return on investment is abysmal. The amount of time invested in creating materials, adapting materials, setting up quizzes, setting up questions, everything you have to do for the first time, right? And that is an incredible drain on your social life. And certainly my partner was, she's been less than enthusiastic sometimes at looking at the back of my head in our home office, while I've been setting up a few more questions for another quiz for some year 7 kids or some trainees for welding. So the time investment is certainly something that you shouldn't underestimate. The returns come later, but at the beginning, it's certainly something that you have to consider. What I consider to be the most important aspects of Moodle, certainly at the start, before you begin to do the more creative things, the more fun things, is to master these 3 big issues. The book module, the quiz module, and the glossary. And I've added onto that Google Drive, which obviously is not a Moodle issue, but something which I feel adds to the Moodle experience and can be used very well with Moodle. You could, for example, take Dropbox, but having some kind of online file storage or online file sharing system adds to the Moodle experience, I feel. But alone, these three activities can provide an incredibly rich and varied course. I've produced courses with book, quiz, glossary, and label that are really more than adequate for extremely high-powered learning environments and learning situations. The glossary is certainly something that I was quite late to discovering. I first remember hearing the word glossary in Biggles books. Again, something that probably only British people have heard of, but these children's books of Biggles the pilot in the First World War had a glossary in them with a lot of the technical jargon that was used. And that was actually about the only time I'd ever heard the word until I came back to Google. Somehow I got through university without seeing glossaries. But the glossary has become quite an important aspect for me. Firstly, because it's very good when you're teaching specific subjects for providing input on jargon. It's great in language learning for vocabulary lists, keywords, key concepts. the nice thing about the glossary is it can work in two ways. It can be a resource that you provide as the teacher for your learners, but it can also be an activity that the learners create themselves, providing that they are of a certain level. And certainly the idea of it working both ways, or maybe a part glossary being improved by students, is certainly a very good learning activity. And another thing which came up quite recently, I really hadn't used it in this way until very, very recently, is as a form of question bank. Now, some of you, I'm sure, will know what that is, or why I'm using that in the glossary. I'll come on to that in a couple of minutes, but for the moment, I'll leave that just hanging there. The book, book 2.0. In many respects, it is a pretty good idea of the book as it would be if it was built around a computer. It can be seen as a multimedia folder. One of the great things about the book is that you can put just about anything that you would put in a computer document into an organized, structured system with text, computer links, embedded video, YouTube, your own drawings or images, and sound files. Certainly something that is can provide a very rich experience and can be used as a good resource for learners. Importantly, for teachers where they haven't got huge teams producing materials or working together to produce materials, the book is a great drop-in resource. If you've created a book for a subject, it's there. It can be used in other courses. So it's something that's certainly very, very useful and saves a lot of time at a later date, and something that I would invest a lot of time in if I'd known about it or used it earlier. I've put a few pages up here of that I've used in books. Here I've got one of the courses that I run. This is a school course. We look at the science fiction series Torchwood and use that as contact with video language, native speaking at a relatively high level. What I did was create a book for each episode. And one of the nice things about these books is that you can provide for each episode pretty good background information. One of the episodes in the first series, the main protagonist was transported back into the Second World War. So the story was quite complex. There was a lot of quite difficult vocabulary, which was important to grasp. But as a background area, I provided a chapter on the music of the Second World War, which was to a certain extent played in the episode, but I extended that with references to Anderson, Lily Marlene, and Dame Vera Lynn, with links to Wikipedia articles and the like. Another from a different Torchwood episode here included a short rip out of a Doctor Who video where Torchwood was first mentioned, Torchwood being a spin-off series from the BBC series Doctor Who. But embedding video and audio within the books is obviously something which is very good for the learners. It provides alternative stimulus and works very, very well. Here, I've got a basic business English course. There's the glossary popping up. One of the nice things about having vocabulary in a glossary is that within the book it becomes clickable, and can help with understanding where normally you would have needed a dictionary search. Here it's one click away. And one of the reasons I included this slide is here, this image. This is a Google Drive image. Within the Google Drive environment, there is a word processor spreadsheet. And for me, the most important thing is a drawing tool, which has an extremely good layout function and allows you to produce a relatively professional graphics very quickly. They can then be exported as PNGs and imported into any website. What is particularly nice, and indeed the slides for this presentation were all produced using the presentation software within Google Drive, is the image search function, which is automatically linked to the Creative Commons, which means that you can use all images that are found there without worrying about copyright issues, something which is in schools not necessarily matter for great concern, although maybe it should be, but certainly if you're teaching in the commercial area, it is. And here, all the backgrounds for the slides were found using the Creative Commons search within the image search function in that. Something which I feel is a great benefit, and that alone is a reason to use the Google Drive functions. Here we've got the scroll of death, and again, it's, if you like, an example of why the book is so useful. This was the original handout which I had concerning email structure. You can see there that it was created for part of a section within Moodle, and that's a very miniaturized version. You're scrolling nearly 3 pages down on that already, and it's part of a section. Once I discovered the book system, it became one icon within the page and was broken down into very neat little chunks. Again, making it much easier to recycle. It's easier to find. I also have a course which is only accessible to me on my site called Warehouse. And in the Warehouse is basically a store of all of these type of resources, so that if I need to tailor a course or create a new course with other elements, I can import from Warehouse and create a course on the fly that is maybe 70 to 80% complete with one import action. So certainly, yeah, again, the book function working very well there, and something that must be used. Quizzes. Yes, we hear lots and lots, and I've heard presentations already today where there's great focus on wikis and lots of other things, which are great, and I am not knocking them. Please don't think that for one moment. But certainly in the secondary school environment, or should we say maybe the K-12 environment, quizzes are going to be the backbone of a lot of courses. It's about using them for testing and assessment, sure, but also for identifying learning, also for using them as a learning process. Diana, I hope I've remembered the name, Diana Dell, I think it was, did a presentation earlier today, which was quite exceptional in the way that she looked at the use of quizzes. And if there's a second instance of that over this weekend, I would highly recommend it. The great thing about quizzes is the flexibility. There are so many options. And since the new 2.9 version, with even more conditional options within the quiz, it's an extremely flexible and powerful tool. it's not terribly popular with a certain type of teacher, I know. And a lot of my colleagues openly question whether we should be using quizzes at all. I find it interesting that most of the students love quizzes. They play them on their mobile phones incessantly, as do quite a lot of the teachers who think that using quizzes in the classroom are a bad idea. So I find it a bit hard to follow their logic. I certainly think it's very useful. Again, it comes down to the quality of the production, not necessarily the fact that it is a quiz in itself. And they are relatively easy for teachers to produce. Yeah, they are only as good as their creator, sure. But one of the important things is that you have this wonderful function, the question bank and the random question, which means that particularly for weaker learners, that you have the chance to allow them to drill, again, a phrase that's not very popular with teachers nowadays. But weaker learners love the chance to practice. I'll use the classic example, past simple irregular verbs. It's something that the weaker learners, they don't like contributing in class because they might be wrong. But sitting in front of the screen at home, they can do this test with 10 questions or 20 questions, and they get half right, and they can do it again. And the questions change because there's a data bank of maybe 300 questions behind that quiz. And that's something which is really a benefit to weaker learners. Google has a terrible press in Germany, a really bad press. There's a great deal of suspicion about their data collection, and almost anything that Google does causes rebellion. I'm not quite sure the sort of on the ground reaction in other countries, although in the UK, when I'm regularly there, I don't hear this. But certainly within schools, it's quite difficult to get them to grasp the idea of the Google Drive, and almost anything to do with Google causes problems. But this addition, this extension to Moodle of using the Google tools, Drive, the ability to produce here one of those drawings about the purchasing process within purchasing department, and add to that the file sharing, Hangouts, and the kids can't lose their homework because it's online. They only have to log in, makes it a very, very good idea. And certainly I feel that it's something that should be considered, and using the plugins that extend that at the repositories for Google is a useful and powerful idea. Yeah, there's a plugin for that. I wanted the picture here of the Chevy Chase house in what's the name of the place, in Christmas Vacation, where all his Christmas lights are plugged into one socket. But yeah, plugins, it's like Christmas at Hamleys. Once you start looking for plugins to extend the system, you could spend all day installing and trying new plugins. But for me, there's a few that you have to look at. I'm not suggesting this is an exhaustive list, but the attendance plugin is a great control for teachers and for admins to be able to a certain extent replace the class book. Configurable reports are great for pulling out unusual data that you might need, particularly when you're not an expert yourself, yeah, and you need to fiddle around and find something. Configurable reports is a great block. The progress bar is also something I recently discovered and is hugely popular with my learners. They like to be able to see how much of the course they've done. They don't like it when I put that up on the screen and show, yeah, blue is done nothing. Yeah, they can see then that really they haven't done an awful lot. So their arguments that my poor marks are unjustified can usually be answered with this screenshot. And then for me, the king of all plugins, Poodle. Video is one of the few things that doesn't work that well in Moodle. Embedding YouTube is great. Everything else can be a bit hit and miss, and it's not as easy as I feel it should be. But certainly Poodle solves 99% of all the problems, and it's very well supported. Any problems or issues are solved very, very quickly. And it's certainly one that has to be at the top of your list of installs. And then for teachers, oh yeah, Poodle again. Of course, because it is really important. It's not just about that. It's also about producing voice submissions. It's about producing audio feedback on work and on assignments. It's an absolutely great thing for introducing another dimension to the Moodle experience. Here's why the games, why the glossary is so useful. The glossary can feed the games block, and with the glossary, you can provide a hidden glossary with terms and definitions, and that can be turned automatically into crosswords and into Hangman and other games. Not just a bit of light relief, although that is a very good reason for doing it, but it produces variation. And then the last two that I would advise are the question plugins, extending the questions. There are lots and lots of these, but three that I find very useful are the drag and drop for gap fill and matching sentences, and selecting missing words. Also for feedback to students, the corrections block provides the chance to provide more direct and focused feedback on, particularly on text work, something that's very, very useful in language teaching. Yeah, it seems that the adrenaline push made me talk more than I intended to. I think the road ahead, if anybody from Germany is here, they might recognize this. It's looks a very remote place and the path is leading to nowhere. But just beyond those dunes is a fabulous beach bar with the most gorgeous chilled Pinot Grigio and Scampis. And I think that that is something that the fact that you can't see it doesn't mean that you shouldn't actually continue along that path. I hope really that people here will feel enabled to have a go. It's not important to think that you have to have a huge team. Doing it yourself is possible, and you can get very good results with that. So I'll wrap up there, and if there are questions, please ask. I'm more than happy to answer anything or come back to you in the forum in the course later. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, Gareth and the iMoot team for a very informative presentation of a very different aspect from coming from sort of a lot of Moodles used by large organizations. You're coming from almost the complete opposite. Really, I really like the idea of the warehouse course and copying it from there. So once again, yeah, thank you very much. I'll leave people to ask some questions. Yeah, and thank you very much for your time.
No problem. It was great fun. That's really nice to hear, Joshua. I believe there are a lot of people out there doing this, but sometimes it's very difficult to connect and exchange experiences. So it's good to hear that that you've had similar experiences in your career. Also, Lester, I see. So it's nearly 11 o'clock in Germany. I can now add a shot of something a little bit stronger into that Coke for the next session, which I will be following. Thank you all very much.